meeting to order. And can I have an approval of the agenda?
I motion to approve the agenda.
Motion? Okay, thank you. And approval of the minutes of the last meeting?
I'll motion to approve them.
Okay,
Second.
thank you. And public forum. Got anything to say, Mike? You're the only public. And the presentations that we've got are done in the agenda, so we'll move on past that. And now we need Adrian for the subcommittee reports and specifically the discussion on the responsibilities. Have you all had an opportunity to review the information that she put in the Teams folders? And you did get access to Teams, is that correct?
No, I sent you an email. I tried to email Ryan to help set it up, but he's out of town.
Okay,
I
well,
still don't have access. Maybe
Adrian?
Adrian can help me.
Yeah, Miranda needs to be given the
Teams access.
team access, because I think it has to be done at
Yeah.
their end. Okay, so,
I didn't realize that, thank you.
Are you taking minutes, Eric, or are we recording and Ryan's gonna take them? Okay.
okay, so we're at the point where, it's over to you. We're down to the item F for the discussion on the committee responsibility recommendations.
So we had talked last time about, we had the communications committee, subcommittee, and the project management subcommittee, and repurposing those in some way, shape, or form, because there hadn't been a lot of activity. And can you remind me who's on what committee?
Coral, Ann, and Chris are communications, and Brian, Lucy, and Gerald were project management.
So
And
now
Now
I'm
Miranda.
stepping into that.
Senior project management. So we all have know where we need to be. That's what I just wanted to make sure everybody had.
Yeah, actually, go talk, I'll update that information in the,
And I think we mentioned too that when the comms committee is in a lull, we're happy to step up and help in other
Right.
ways. We'll
And-
all come together as needed.
After that conversation last month, I realized we probably don't need to just recreate the wheel. We can go with what we have and just kind of repurpose it a little bit. So I had asked Eric to help me with this, but we've come up with some new descriptions for the responsibilities of each committee. I don't think that was in the Teams folder, so I apologize about that, but I did have a summary of what each committee would be responsible for.
I think it is there.
It
I
is.
saw it there
It is
today.
there, okay. So it would be reorganized into project management and park operations, and then communications and events. So I was just gonna go over kind of what we came up with for the responsibilities for each committee, and maybe give you a little bit of homework to review and let us know where you see that should be different, or we could talk about it here. I just want to put anybody on the spot.
we're good with being on the spot.
Okay.
Most of us. I won't speak for everybody.
So the project management and park operations would be assessing the parks each year, kind of like the state of the parks. They would take responsibility for that. Gather information from the public regarding conditions of the park system, assist in goals and performance metrics, expand or contract recreational programming. So thinking about when the parks are open, what kind of programming we need, ideas for that, making recommendations to the PGAC on all of that, and thinking about potential partnerships with other entities related to the park system and programming. Any thoughts on the project management park operations committee?
That's good.
So then for the communications and events, just as it sounds, the communications part would still be there, still doing what you're doing, and making recommendations on what communications are needed related to the parks, giving feedback on the communications plan for Parks and Recreation, anticipating the needs for those, and then assisting in development of event management, so thinking about vendors and volunteers and public safety, and then making recommendations to PGAC on those items. So that's what we've come up with. I don't know if you have any feedback now, if you want to continue this conversation to next month, if you want to think about what that needs to look like between now and then.
I would just offer that in doing the annual assessment of the parks, at least for our universe of samples, which is 2, it's worked very well so far for one person to take one park. And so that implies crossover, as you were suggesting,
Maybe we can continue doing it that way, but then when we get those results, that committee can take those results and
and run with it.
run with them. Moving on.
Yeah, are you going to touch on this?
So that's what I just went over. That's the formal version of what I just presented on.
Okay. Okay.
That's what I didn't know was on the Teams folder, so
It is.
I'll double, okay.
Yeah, I hadn't had a chance to read this. I've had a really slam day and just came in and copied it off. And it looked like the chart portion was the same for both of the committees, but I hadn't, and I hadn't had a chance to read the responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed.
Well, that's the chart, that's what the chart is the RACI. If you're not familiar with that, there's a description on the second page on what that chart means.
Yeah, that's why I said I just hadn't had a chance to read it. I saw that the description was there.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll undo it?
Yeah. So as you know, I did a survey and I touched on those results last meeting, but now that they're formal, they haven't changed much. Pickleball was by far the favorite response to the amenity that we want to see at Silverline. This is a snapshot of all the responses. So pickleball was first with 435 responses. Coming in second was the food truck court with 158, so there's a big difference. And then green space was third. So I took that and I looked at just the Woodfin residents that responded. There were 320 Woodfin residents out of around 700 responses, so about half and half. Pickleball is still a favorite for the Woodfin residents, but the margin's not quite as big. So it was 158 responses for pickleball, and then food truck court was second with 103, and dog park was third with 76.
Interesting.
Then we collected responses from the Greenway meeting that was held at the end of the month, and I thought it was interesting that those responses were completely different. Pickleball was pretty far down on the list, about halfway through, and the favorite was outdoor community gathering space, with green space being second and food truck court being third. Of course, the results, there's not as many of them, but I just thought it was interesting that it had flip-flopped.
And did they identify, I came to the second session that night, and it was like the one that wasn't as well attended. Did they say if they were Woodfin residents at that one? Okay.
That's why we broke it out into we knew they attended the meeting, but that's as far as we went with that, because it was a written response.
When we say food truck court, what does that mean? Is that like a hookup for one food truck, or does that mean it's for 5 and people go there for lunch every day, or?
Well, I guess
I
it's
mean,
up for
that's-
interpretation,
right.
but I think it would be, I would think that would mean more than one that was on a regular basis.
And is it possible to do that without taking over? Could you do pickleball and have the hookups for the food trucks and then have a special place to park that is not taking over the pickleball pad?
I don't know, but I would say probably not. You probably couldn't do both. And there may be some issues with having a food truck court in general that we haven't realized. So it's an idea that I've heard several times throughout the process of planning for the parks, and so I think that's probably how it ended up here on the survey.
Yeah, I think that the whatever you put together, like the drawing of it, the illustration, and of course, I mean, we don't know because we're not architects, but there was room for like a food truck there. And honestly, with that space, I don't, like, even at like soccer games and stuff like that, they only have one food
Right.
truck because I don't think you make enough money once you
Right.
start to have too many.
That was, when we were looking at having a food truck for the 5K, or was that you that did the calling? I feel like I had a.
I've pulled some metrics from a couple of food truck operators.
Right.
And so I've got a couple of observations about
Yeah.
that, but I'll wait until, until it's my turn. But yes, do you want me to?
No, go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so first, the pickleball numbers are probably inordinately high, because as I told everybody, I contacted some people that were interested in pickleball and let them know that this survey was going up. I also contacted bikers, bicyclists, to let them know that there could be an item on there. And those were the two sort of groups that, you know, had the potential to front-end load the survey, and I wanted, you know, full disclosure, I wanted everybody here to know that. The bicyclists didn't seem to be as up to it as the pickleball people. So those numbers could be a little bit high, you know, based on, you know, it being front-end loaded for them. Green space, it seems to me that that's what we're providing with Riverside and for the rest of the park. You know, so I'm not sure, you know, why, I mean, it seems like we've sort of covered that. Food trucks, a food truck needs about 200 people in order to make their nut. And by and large, my sense is the reason that they're food trucks is because they go to the people and not normally expect the people to come to them. So, you know, given the level of traffic down there, I just can't see people, you know, leaving in sufficient numbers to go to a food truck court. As for the pickleball drawing, there's easily room for a couple of food trucks down there. Depending on hookups, we could get a minimum of two. I stuck one of them in there because I would see that if we went the pickleball route, if we were to recommend that, I will say right here that that's what I would like to recommend, that I see that for, and certainly the quality of courts that we would build for tournaments, for all sorts of things that would draw the numbers of people that would bring food trucks in. So I don't see that as, you know, mutually exclusive at all. And if there were a, you know, an interest in a food truck operator setting up down there, we're going to have the setup. I don't see any reason why that couldn't happen, you know, absent even everything else. So I don't see that that is, you know, in any way a conflict or, and the other thing is that for community meeting space, at least, once again, and Eric, I don't, well, you did see the sketch that I put together. It seems that that can qualify as community meeting space, dependent in part on the size of the structure. But arguably, as long as they weren't too loud, you could have two of them. You know, I would lobby for an upstairs and a downstairs. So,
I had thought about grouping this together to make it a little more, you know, even across the board as far as the categories of what people are looking for. But some of the items were too far from others, and it was more manipulation than I was comfortable with. So that's why I just left it as it is.
well, as we talked the other day, small event space and outdoor community gathering, to me, are sort of the same, you know, potentially the same, as long as we're talking about unconditioned space. And adding those together and adding food truck and the concessions together, you still get to about 200, a little north of 200 respondents, which are still less than half of, you know, the pickleball response.
I have a couple of quick thoughts on that too. Like, I would be okay with one food truck or, you know, concession stand, but I feel like it's gonna, if we have multiple food trucks there, it's gonna utilize a lot of the parking space, and when people are going to the park to use it for as the park's intended, then that might be difficult for them. I also want to advocate for some of the local business owners that are helping to improve Riverside Drive, like Riverside Rhapsody. You know, they really put a lot of effort into making that space really nice, and they have food there, and they're really helping to improve Woodfin. So I feel like I know competition is healthy and good, but if we start building this food truck center, I feel like we're going to potentially upset business owners that have already laid some roots here and are investing in improving that whole section of town. So just another thought I had.
I wanted to share, there was some other responses, so I put those together too. And there were probably about 49, some of them were redundant, so I removed them. So what you see here is about 45 responses. And green space was top response with six votes, and the community center was number 2, and the swimming pool was number 3. So just so you can see what other ideas people had. Other examples were a carousel, a community garden, CrossFit, a skate park, more playground. All of those had just one response, of course, because they were fill in the blank. Tennis courts, open air pavilion for Saturday markets. That was actually twice.
Sand volleyball court would be cool.
That's a hot event at bars.
Sand volleyball's, it's a lot of fun. And they get us well at Carrier too. That court's used a lot.
Yeah, both sand and grass volleyball are pretty popular.
So
There's some good ones.
what I'm looking for today is a recommendation to take to council next week about the building, and then we can revisit the conversation about the use that would be where the building is now. It sounds to me like the recommendation to council is going to be for staff to begin the process of requesting proposals for removal of the building demolition. We can also wait and gather more information if you feel like that's necessary, or we can make a recommendation. You can make a recommendation to leave the building. So I just like for you to take some formal action on one of those items and make a recommendation that I can take to council on Tuesday.
Who would like to speak?
I would like to make the recommendation that the town accepts requests for proposals to remove the building with high priority on demolishing the building and reusing as many materials as economically reasonable.
Okay.
I concur.
Yeah. And I met with a fellow on Saturday who is interested in doing that. And we spent a good bit of time going through the building, looking at, exactly, what could be reused and what would be involved in taking it down. And when you look at something with an eye to demolishing it as opposed to an eye to building it, you see it differently. And in fact, I saw it differently, than I had seen it before. And this one fella is primarily interested in the 2 buildings at Riverside Park, and we'll talk about those in a minute, because I think that ought to go on as a recommendation to the town immediately. But he's got he wants primarily the roofing. But he pointed out that, and he's in HVAC business, so he pointed out that the little 8-inch ductwork, that connects everything, is now selling for $4 a foot. There are 36-foot trusses up there, not spanning the whole building, but spanning, the 2/3 of the building, that could be removed and reused. I see, lots of doors. He was very interested in how many windows were there. He would like, I see miles of electrical conduit, and and things like that that could be either reused if we could get them in the hand, if not him, if we could get them in the hands of, someone who can do that. Not everybody can or will take effectively used equipment, but I mean conduit, junction boxes and stuff like that, and all that stuff is very expensive now. So it seems to me that with the agreement of the board to let staff proceed with finding the best way to go about accomplishing what Ann has proposed, that we've got options out there.
Do you think he would have the ability to demolish the building, or he would want to go in there and take certain things out and then?
It's all conversation. He's got a track hoe, and so he could demolish the building. So, he would have the ability to do that. But, and this is maybe a little bit premature, but there are ways that I see whoever, the successful contractor and the town to work together. And Eric, I'm glad you're here to hear this, because you might be the person to help facilitate this. But as an example, the walls are 8-inch concrete block. I calculated that there were about 140 tons of concrete block in that 11-foot tall wall, and that and I also happened to take a load of building materials to the dump today. So I know that they're charging $43.75 per ton to dump whatever you want to dump there. And so 140 tons, and also to get to Panther Branch is 12 miles and takes 20 minutes, whereas to get to the quarry that routinely accepts concrete, and presumably concrete block, to be reprocessed, is 6 miles and 10 minutes. So, in terms of the overall cost, whoever's doing it, however it's done, that could save substantially on the trucking alone. And if the quarry would, cut us a little bit of slack on, a tipping fee for that block, there are ways, I think, and that's just mentioning one of them, but there are ways to sort of sweeten the deal for, whoever might ultimately be interested in taking the building down, because it's going to cost one way or the other. It's just a matter of how much of an offset we can negotiate to, bring that cost down. And as a reminder, the last year, the architects estimated a full demolition cost of $150,000. Now, I would think that we could do it for substantially less than that, but the primary cost is going to be disposal of the materials. And for example, if there's a lot of woodwork up in there, and if whatever can't be salvaged could be hauled to the stump dump, because they grind up pallets down there, so they're accustomed to dealing with nails and stuff like that, then that would be closer, save on trucking, probably save on tipping fees and everything. So, I think that there are things that could be done. I'm sort of anticipating a negative response from the board, and that might be not, they might not, they might say, fine, go ahead and go with it. So that's just some, sort of random information.
That quote that you just mentioned, was that from when they were reviewing the options for the building?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and arguably, they had a plus or minus 50% in all of the options that they put in there. The least expensive, other than demolition, was between $360,000 and $540,000. And I believe that if we were to go with something, an architecturally designed, but something on the order of what I proposed, which would be a smaller building with pickleball courts, then based on everything that I've heard anecdotally and in person, is that there are lots of opportunities to fundraise for pickleball. They, and whether it was done as a name your pickleball court sort of thing, or, small donations, or, and that's assuming the town didn't have the money to do it. I still have the $250,000 that is currently in the budget in my mind, and I realize that that's just until the end of this fiscal year, and that there's another fiscal year. But given all of the stuff that's happening in Asheville between tennis and pickleball, and my sense that having the courts would be, good for Woodfin, for Woodfin to kind of own, that the sooner we move, the better. So, yes, I agree with you, and I've got even more arguments to present if need be.
Somehow I'm not surprised.
Okay, so.
The Riverside buildings, you were gonna mention, we had a staff meeting earlier, and I do believe that we would recommend including those buildings as well in the
Okay.
whole process.
Okay, so the issue there is the fellow that I spoke to was the one that contacted Shannon a month ago. And he is primarily interested in those because those have clear value for demolition and reuse.
What are they? Sorry, I'm not.
Okay, under the bridge is it's a not quite square, but probably 2.5-story tall metal building.
Okay.
And it's the type of metal building that it's metal framing, and then metal on the outside.
Right under the bridge?
Yeah,
Okay.
almost right under the bridge.
Okay.
And then adjoining that is a Quonset-ish hut, rounded top. It's been damaged
Okay.
severely, but the panels are still available. You can still buy parts to rebuild what's damaged there. And he is more interested in that. In this guy's case, doing a package deal would be more attractive to him. And I told him that it would all have to go through the town's RFP process and whatever. I think that getting back to the reuse of the materials in the Silverline building, if we could put together a core of demolition, volunteers that signed off that a lot of stuff could be salvaged and at least recycled that would not otherwise be done, and that anybody that was taking the building down probably would not spend the time or labor to try to save. Some of, like the conduit that I just mentioned, that being some of it. But this guy walked through and he said, that a drop-in ceiling, you still use that, and the insulation, so. There's also it's got to be a 2,000-gallon oil tank that is down there also that needs to be gotten out of there. It's above ground, measures 5 feet 6 by 18 feet long.
Where is it?
It's as you Riverside, back to Riverside, you pull in, it's immediately on the left.
I was thinking Silverline.
Yeah, so that needs to be gotten out of there. The salt that's in the building needs to be moved. There's some sand that's just outside of the building that would interfere with taking that down.
We talked to the Public Works staff about this, and I think they're going to make it through this winter before they remove that salt. But we can talk about that whenever we get ready to.
It would have to be moved before anything could be done with the building.
Right.
And
I understand.
in this one person's opinion, January to March is his sweet time, because that's when his crew does not have as much work. And that's going to apply to, many contractors as well. So many of the people that might bid on this are going to want to do it at a time when the work is otherwise slack. And so for that reason, I would suggest, that we get on it, that we whatever process you have to go through to notify people that it's out there. And in that vein, personally, if it can be done, and I don't see why it can't, I would like to see an open bidding process. I know that for stuff that's sold that's surplused, and I forget the website, but we did it for the ABC board. We got rid of some stuff down there. You put it out there for open bid, it's not a sealed bid sort of thing. So, we make it available so that it's a competitive bidding process, so that somebody that wants
I believe
it.
that's what the process will look like.
Okay, because a lot of times, things are done by sealed bid. You only get one chance there. If it's done by open bid, then somebody comes back and says, oh, well, I'll go another,
I would
Still
imagine
bid
if it's like, if
threshold.
the amount that it's going to be, you'll probably have a policy that.
Yeah, we checked it earlier, and I don't think it'll trigger the sealed bid, the formal bid process, but we're still looking into it.
Okay. Well, there is at least one person that is ready to go. And I asked him to, I think I said, send me your thoughts or something like that. I didn't say send me a bid. And I told him that, that I would keep it personally confidential because I didn't want to influence anything else. But I thought that whatever he sent me would influence, sort of the shape of how a proposal might be put together.
Well, we'll take it to council on Tuesday, and I'll keep you posted on what comes of that conversation and what the next steps will be.
Okay, so that's two different, we'd like to Silver Line and
Yeah.
Riverside. Super. And just for my records and for yours, while we're there, this is the information that I said that I found there. It's a building permit dated September of 2020 that shows the re-roofing with a metal roof. I thought it had been done a long time, much longer ago than that. And it says for $66,800. This was in the window down there.
Anything else on Silver Line Building before we move on? So the wave modeling report, I shared that with you. Eric put it together. He visited, and maybe you want to tell him about your experience visiting the modeling facility?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think visiting there really underscored the value of the physical modeling itself, because not only did we see the 2D model then converted to a 3D and see how it performed, and then the team could make some revisions, adjustments to the actual pitch of the wave structure itself is critical, the dimensions, the width of it, one of the things that came out of that was too narrow. It creates kind of a dangerous sort of a cycle of water all across the breadth of that wave, and so they widened that a little bit, played around with that, see how they could mitigate that risk. We talked, but the value for me primarily was I had them as my audience, and I could ask the questions that have been circulating and bubbling up through this committee and everybody else who's been talking about it. And so with them as my captive audience, then I was able to ask those questions and come away with some of the revelations were helpful in that, like maintenance of the wave, very low maintenance ongoing. Not to say that it's not there, not to say we wouldn't monitor the condition of the wave, but once you build it, it's a fixed structure. There's not a whole lot of maintenance. It's really more what does the river carry down and leave on top of it, when the water recedes or drops. So that on the maintenance side was pretty cut and dry. But like public safety, people navigating the waters, and so you have competing groups of people, some using the wave, some wanting to avoid the wave, some being caught in the wave and being swept over, and what does that look like? And I was happy to hear that if you do get caught in that wave and you go over, it just shoots you out, and they demonstrated that with that model, so you could see what that effect would be hydrologically. And so as a result of that, then one of my commitments to the town was to report every day what had happened. And so as part of that report, there was a summary of one of the appendices was each day's summary of the days that I was there. And then the notes and the things that I found. Then I compiled that and put it into a report that was a little more action-oriented. And I think that's what we really need to be focused on as a town, is what do we need to anticipate and do in the time that we have between now and the time that the wave opens next year. And so that's what that report was intended to do. The audience was the town manager, and then Adrian, I thought there was value then to share that with you all for, I guess that could become an action plan perhaps for some of the members of this committee in different ways. So that's what that report is and does.
So I was going to go over 3 of the components of that report that he shared. The first being event management of the wave. So things that were pointed out to consider will the possibility of the site becoming an event destination for freestyle kayakers and other users. And thinking about that, do we have adequate parking, traffic control, food vendor relations, marketing, et cetera? And do we need to develop policy and guidelines for event management and cost sharing? So some of the action items that were identified were to identify owners and operators of similar event venues, and I know Ann might have some things to share as far as that goes. And we can get to that right after this if that works for you. And then assemble a working group to gather information and compile it and develop recommendations for what that's going to look like to the powers that be. The next topic was public safety. So how is watercraft managed during construction? How is it managed after construction? What restrictions should be in place? And is there signage necessary to achieve public safety? So the action items identified were to add temporary signage during construction for users to exit the river at Silverline Park before they get there. To create permanent signs with alerts for flotation device, water safety, things like that. And then to develop a maintenance plan to inspect the craggy bridge piers and discuss plans of maintenance of that bridge with DOT for after construction. And then, as Eric mentioned, the next item is future maintenance, but as he mentioned, it'll be rather low maintenance, but there will be a minor adjustments needed within the first 18 months that they'll have to come in and take care of to ensure that long-term maintenance goes well. So there will be debris that will need to be removed after, heavy flow events. So action items are to enlist the assistance of an advisor to determine when that initial adjustment's necessary within the 18 months. And that could be from one of our current contractors, subcontractor, but it's just something that we need to keep on the front burner. Develop a maintenance plan to include inspection intervals and addressing the removal of debris, who's going to do that. And then, again, seek information from owners of similar structures and how they handle maintenance, short-term and long-term. So I thought this was very beneficial for my thoughts. And it's something that we should probably keep discussing and determining who may be responsible for some of these action items, if there's a separate task force that would be necessary to carry some of this out. Again, the report's in the Teams folder, so I highly recommend that you read it. There's additional information in there about budgeting and other things that I didn't think was necessary to this conversation, but it's worth the read.
I've got a couple of questions. You mentioned in there that there might be a possibility of the need for a plate to adjust, and that was one of the 2 ways that they were talking about trying to adjust that. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. The wave structure itself is sort of a step-down structure. And so on the very center is where there is a plate that will run the breadth of that. And that is, through modeling, is going to be a necessity to have that. But it's, and it's modular, it's what's used in a lot of these types of structures. So it is affixed to the rock. And so, for example, you might have tracks that you could put that to adjust it up and down this way, or you could build it up a little bit, so you get the pitch right as well as the positioning right once it's in place. So they'll put it in place at construction, and then whether it's at 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or whatever that interval or intervals looks like and needs to be, then someone will come back in, presumably S2O would be my recommendation to the town. We keep them on retainer. They come back in then and oversee then the repositioning of that plate. And the plate will be permanent, but it is movable. So it is more modular. It's only in that one section. So that's what that is.
And concerning the debris removal,
Yes.
there currently on Craigie Bridge is an enormous pile of debris
Yes.
against the far structure. And apparently that's the state's responsibility to
The
remove,
bridge.
and they're
The bridge.
obviously not doing it.
Yes.
As far as the wave is designed, it seems that it should be designed to self-flush, that there should be nothing that catches debris, because I can't imagine anybody getting out there, any of our people getting out there and actually, removing stuff, yet it would be important that that be done. So is that
So
sort of self-flushing?
Yeah, so admittedly, not an expert on any of this. I will say this report was not exhaustive. These aren't the only things that we should consider, but these were the things that came up during conversation. I think in practice, it is a fact that things, when the water rises and then recedes, you look at the dam down there, the MSD dam, you often see tree trunks and big limbs over that. It will occur, and you can't really design it. There's not a method that they even spoke to that you can't design it to not happen from their point of view. I have no idea. But they said it will occur. And so then you just need to anticipate that. And what others in the group said, so there were a couple of kayakers on that group, they said, well, kayakers would typically take care of that for you.
Oh, okay.
And so it kind of takes care of itself.
It is self-correcting in a sense.
What I think the town would want to be mindful of is if you're going to host an event, or there's going to be an event hosted there, you definitely want to pay attention to it at that point in time to clear what's around the bridge piers or to see that that is done. And so really, I think opening a dialogue with DOT would be helpful, because if they know that we care, they might take a different tack on maintenance. I have no high hopes on that. And if not, then what? And I think we also have been approached by a couple of community groups who might like to make it a community project to monitor the bridge and the structure itself to keep it clear. And so that's something that someone actually contacted Shannon, wants to enter into an agreement to do that. And so that actually helps with liability and some other things too. We can address those. And Randy, you may have some experience. I think we should talk with the Y to see what types of protections we need to have. That could be on this list as well. What types of protections for the town, for just general liability for any of these things that we're building? What are we missing? But the structure itself and the debris, it's going to occur, is what I understand.
Well, the debris at the bridge right now, it looks far more than it should be turned over to a bunch of people that want to do a good thing.
I don't
it's dangerous.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I've seen that too, and I don't.
Oh, no, I'm just agreeing.
Yeah, an occasional log or something on the wave, I can see a kayaker saying,
Right, yeah.
pitch it a little bit to one side.
Exactly, but when it's compounded.
Yeah, it's a big issue down there now.
Yep. Agreed.
One of the key takeaways for me was getting information from other entities that do the similar kind of thing and how they manage these things. So that's something that I think it'd be good for you guys to think about, and I will too, who those entities are and who should we be talking to. Speaking of that, Walt had asked Ann to present on a place she went.
Sure, yeah, I was, had a trip planned to Florida in early October, and I heard Walt and Eric talking about the Whitewater Park in Columbus, Georgia, which I didn't know anything about, but that's like on the way there. So I thought, I'll just stop and see what it's like there. So the Chattahoochee River, and I've done some Googling, and I was there for a total of, an hour and a half over the course of 2 different weekends. So I'm not an expert on this place, but I just thought you might like to see some pictures of it. This is the Chattahoochee, this is not, but the Chattahoochee River runs the border of Alabama and Georgia in the south. And so Columbus is on the east bank and Phoenix City is on the west bank. The park that I was at mostly was in Columbus, and they have a massive river development project that the wave, as I understand it, was created, their engineered wave park in 2012. And they have a lot more space between the street and the river than we do. It was, it's basically road, old mills, river, and then there's these developed sort of terracing down to the river. And so here is, there are many ways to enter the park, but this was one of them. You can see the playground over on the left, and if you'll go forward, Adrian, this was the weekend before there happened to be a big freestyle World Cup event happening the second weekend. But Whitewater Express, you can see there in the back, they seem to be the sole outfitter on the river, and they had outposts on the Alabama and Georgia side. But it was only their rafts that I saw coming down. So I don't know if they have exclusive rights, but it seemed like it to me.
Sorry, I got ahead of myself.
It's okay. I had just driven straight from Chattanooga and was desperate to find a bathroom, so that was like hot on my agenda. I was like hunting for the bathrooms. And so here are some bathroom pictures, which is relevant to us anyway, but I thought they made a good use of bathroom space. This one is under a bridge, and the next one is kind of built into a bank. Unfortunately, all of the permanent restrooms were locked.
Oh, no.
And I found an enormous bank of porta potties, but I was kind of disappointed because the restrooms are really cool looking, but they're not in use.
I wonder if it was out close to where that event was going on.
Yes.
I bet that they are probably open when there's not a big event going on.
Well, this was the weekend before, so there wasn't, I don't know. And it was October, and it seems pretty pleasant there year-round. And just to get a sense of how big the city is, on the Columbus side is Columbus State University, and on the other side, on the Alabama side, is Troy University. So big university populations there, and it's also home to Fort Benning, so there's a big Army base as well that is a large part of the city. And so that's looking across, and you can see that's an amphitheater, and they've got a stage set up for big events, and that's also Troy University over there too, just above the amphitheater. And then I thought they did a really nice job with art along the way. This is kind of a tribute to folks who served at Fort Benning. And just the terracing and the landscaping, I thought they did a really great job on that. And they had zip lines across the river, so apparently they've just recently rebranded. I think it used to be called the Chattahoochee River Park or Whitewater Park, and now it's called Rush South, and it's all through this one hub, like the zip line tours and the rafting, and it's all called Rush South. And they have the Rush South Festival, which is what was happening the next weekend in October. But they seem like they kind of got together and funneled everything, all recreation, through this one.
I thought that was cool.
Yeah, that's really,
Yeah.
that's really neat. And is this owned by a city, or is because I'm wondering, like, is the actual river feature owned by this Rush South Whitewater? Because I'm under the impression that you can't really own a river bed.
It's hard to tell. Like, I don't know. And like, just being there, it felt like it was Rush South. And what Rush South means is maybe it's a corporate municipal partnership. I don't know, but it's not very clear to me.
We looked at Bend, Oregon, and potentially similarly to this, they had a very large, expanded riverfront operation that included Greenways. It was operated by a completely separate group that was owned by the town, but they had their own website, they had their own board. They might have even had a parallel funding path, so that the town put in some and, you know, they were able to maybe seek contributions or something like that. So that was something that I looked at. I thought I brought it to the board,
Yeah, we talked about it.
you know, some months ago. So here we have, you know, a second, you know, sort of, kind of similar.
And I thought this was cool education just about their sewer system that they had there. And if you want to keep going, there's some interesting
Get
signage
MSD on
coming
that.
up. Yeah, great. So then looking upstream, I'm headed down to the river now. That's the wave, the big wave at the end they call the good wave, which I thought was kind of cute. It's good wave. And then you can keep going. We're getting closer, and and I've also learned that this is a dam-controlled flow. So in the morning, it's pretty low, and then by the end of the day, it can be pretty big, or very big. So that's something that we don't have, and like looking at events, they can make sure they have the right amount of water for the right situation. And they were advertising the family-friendly float is the early trip, and the more adventurous is the midday, and then the carnage float is the end of the day when the water is the biggest. And so, of course, I was interested in signage, so here's some of their signs. You can't really access the river, it's this fence all the way down until we get up closer.
Can I just make a quick observation on one of those signs, because the signs are great? The wear it sign, I think, is really important, I'm thinking from the liability. So Darby Communications works with a canoe and a kayak company out of Maine, northern Maine, and they will not publish any photos that consumers send in if they're not wearing a life vest. And I think that's really, like, as we think about putting up images and such on social, we should be really cognizant of, we need to really promote that people are always in a PFD.
Yeah, absolutely.
But those are also attractive signs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Very
know,
attractive.
Not just, you know,
Very
wear
well
it.
done.
You know, I mean, you know, it's
Very catchy.
color
yes.
and attracting.
That's a
Good
really
message.
useful photo.
Yeah.
It really is.
And so then down below, there's like this big pipe, and they're kind of telling you, like,
Don't worry.
don't worry, it's cool. We got the permit.
Or how about get out here?
Right. So this is below the wave, but then like the water looks, you know, clean.
Pretty clear now.
I would hazard the guess that the water that comes out of MSD might be higher quality than what's
Yeah.
coming down the river.
Up above it.
Up above.
I think you're right.
Yeah, so,
I think you're right. Did you jump in it?
I did not. So this was, these were children out here in a kayaking clinic.
Very cool.
Yeah. And so you can see this is the tip of this little peninsula, and we're kind of walking down, or walking upstream, and I'm going to take you there
That's
next.
so cool.
So this is a bridge that's crossing,
I have a
yeah.
question. So is that island, that's not a manufactured,
I think it is.
okay,
I think it is.
it's an access point?
Yes.
So,
Yep.
how do you get to that?
You park up on the road, and then there's a series of steps that come down. I mean, it's a haul. You know,
Yeah.
it's a walk with a boat. But yes, then you cross this bridge that's coming, and so you can get in the river from below the wave, or you can take out there, and then you can get in above the wave on the other side of the island or the peninsula.
Did you notice if the kayakers had to pay to put on the water or pay to park?
I don't think so. And no, parking is free.
It was all free,
Up on the
okay.
town, up in the town, yeah. So here's the bridge that goes across.
That's really nice.
nice stone steps too.
And they're their sponsors.
Yeah, that's what we want to see.
Yeah. And so here's on the island, and they were preparing for this event, but I'm guessing because they host events here, I don't know how often, but I'm guessing this is kind of semi-permanent infrastructure that's there.
But that's also nice in that it's got a very natural, riverbank look to it.
Right.
And not, flat concrete,
Yeah.
very attractive.
So there's the entry point, if you want to just practice your skills, I guess. Practice, the flat water, which is, what the children were doing, because they could kind of toy with like how close they wanted to get to the good wave. And there's looking back at it. I noticed they've got those risers up there. That was the seating for the following weekend. And so here was my big find of the trip. I could not believe it. I was watching people and they were, I was taking videos and texting them to Walt. And then this woman got out of the river and I said, hey, do you want me to send this video? I just got this great video of you. She's like, sure. And I said, I'm here visiting from Asheville, blah, blah, blah. I told her, she's like, oh, I do the outdoor programs at UNCA. And it turns out she's on the committee that was organizing the event, and she was there early for the event and was playing around. And so I got her number, and she said she would be interested in talking with us once we get kind of down the road with event planning and, just interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it was time well spent.
Yeah.
She gave it a good ride.
Yes, she
Yeah, that's
did.
really helpful.
And so there were these yellow whitewater express rafts coming down, and there's a guy in a ducky. He ate it before the rapid and went through just fine. And then groups would go through the rapid, and then they would paddle back up, and they would try to surf, and then, of course, I'll dump out and want to go do it again. It was a big wave. It's a big drop.
You said about 10 feet.
I think so, yeah. And so then this is just more pictures of the river. And I did talk to one other lady who I was trying to get some sense of like, how long has it been like this, or is this an engineered situation? And she gave me some story that I was like, this is not true. So like, I don't think this can't be possible. So I don't, other than finding that piece of information about the engineering happening in 2012, I don't know like what aspects of this are engineered other than the good wave. But they've got several car bridges, and then this is headed up to the pedestrian bridge, and they had another series of signage that were sort of highlighting the industrial history of the both towns.
Is there a comparison wave to the good wave, or they just call it the good wave? Like, is there a bad wave?
No, it's just like, it's the good
Depends on the
wave.
time of day.
Yeah, right.
Vibes or-
Yeah, go ahead. And so they're still under construction with various parts of it, so it's a long process. But this was little homage to the different mills that have been around. And here's the pedestrian bridge. That Riverwalk West Trail sign is part of the Alabama side, and I think you could do like a 20-mile circuit if you knew all the right ways to go on their path.
And that's all pedestrian?
That bridge is,
That's a wide
yes,
bridge.
yeah. That was my question. The woman, that was one of the things that I was questioning. Was it a car bridge that was turned pedestrian, or was it built solely for people? And she said it was built just for people, but I questioned that because it was a big bridge. But it was great. You couldn't see Good Wave from there, so it's not like you're going to be observing the event from there, but it was a great view of the big picture of the two places. And if you'll go ahead, and Phoenix really is spelled like that, everyone.
It is weird.
It's not a typo.
Right, it's not a typo.
It was founded by somebody that couldn't spell.
So here are some of their signs about their industry.
The coal red, denim blue.
How long did it take you to get down there?
To drive there?
To drive to, yeah.
I was going from Chattanooga, so it was maybe 5 hours.
Okay.
And then, but I think it's, what, 3.5 from here to Atlanta. So maybe 5 to 6 to get there from here.
I think Columbus has changed since I was there in boot camp in the
Uh-huh.
60s.
Oh. Okay, so now here's the following weekend. And you can see they've got, this is like the Swiftwater Rescue people, the Coast Guard just kind of hanging out down at the low end below the wave. And you can keep going. And, you know, the sidewalks were full of vendors and food and people and so there's that peninsula there. And they had a big jumbotron set up so you could see the wave or see the surfing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is that sign one that's there all the time?
Was it
Which
there-
one?
The flotation required.
Oh, yeah, that's
For
permanent.
a big event, because
Yeah,
people are not going to
right.
have, you know, that perspective.
And so this is not my picture, but I found it on their website and I thought it was a better aerial shot of just kind of what it looks like.
It's really cool.
That is
Easily
really cool.
photoshopped.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
Yep. So
That's
that's
excellent.
it. It was
Thank you
fun.
for sharing.
Sure.
Okay, with all that in mind, my thought is that there is enough meat just around the wave and the utilization of the wave that would be the work of a completely different committee. Perhaps one that had one of our members on that committee, but that was, and one person from the town, but maybe more than one professional kayaker or competitive kayaker. The woman,
Rowan.
would be someone that would have experience with putting together events, so she could be a very valuable person, but once again, a small committee of, I don't know, maybe 5 people. And I think that it should be formed sooner rather than later. There's a whole lot of stuff in terms of policies and just a whole lot, because once the wave's built, it's going to, day one, it's going to be in use. And so it's not a matter of waiting until, the rocks are in the water.
Yeah.
Yeah, people will be asking, how, can I have an event down there
Yeah.
as soon as?
Signage is going to have, not
Yeah.
just the construction signage, but, the signage like you're talking about, all that's going to have to be done, thought out well in advance and ordered well in advance, so.
So I guess, and this was just, here's an introduction to the things Eric learned and action items that should be on our radar. And so I think the next step is to identify that committee of people and to identify other entities that are doing the same kind of work and maybe having the PGAC help us with contacting those and, doing something like Ann did and coming back and presenting and letting us know how things go. So maybe next meeting I can bring back a recommendation on that group, and then between now and then we can be brainstorming other places to contact.
Well, yes, but that's also arguably sort of the meat of what that committee would do, is, making those contacts. In Great Falls, Grand Rapids, Michigan. I met that guy up there, and Brian was in touch with him. They are not as far along on this, but they're going to be doing a much bigger project.
Well, I can work on the committee, who should be on the committee, and we don't have to contact those people. I just want so the committee can hit their ground running, a list of the ideas you guys might have that we could pass along to them.
Okay.
I'd like to just ask a quick question. Is anyone familiar with the Green River race that happened this
Yes.
past weekend?
Yeah.
Yes, so that's a great that's a local team that put that on. They had 2,000 spectators. NPR covered the race.
And it's a hard place to get to,
It's
too.
a very hard
You have to,
place to get
rappel
to.
down.
Exactly.
Great weather this weekend.
Great weather, just even like record number of participants, I think, just, I know that that's all, well, it's dam controlled, but, it's a downriver race, it's not like a situation, it's not one location, but I still think like, just thinking about folks we can tap into from an event standpoint, that crew will be really helpful and they're local.
Where does that take place?
Saluda.
Okay. Yeah, that's,
Yeah, they've got, even when it's bad weather, they've got a ton of people out there, and you really do have to like hold onto a rope and walk like on a 45-degree angle down.
2,000 people did
Yeah.
that? Oh, wow.
I mean, they may have like easier access now, but last time I went, it was like that.
Yeah, I didn't go this year.
Okay, and just in terms of, sort of the time frame of things, my experience when this committee was formed was it took me a couple of months to start really getting my head around all the stuff that needed to be done and, how we were going to go about it. And, we're in November right now. If we wait until December to come back with another recommendation, then that means the committee gets formed in January, February, March, of really starting to get rolling. Then that doesn't leave a whole lot of time between hopefully the completion of the wave by this time next year.
I was simply going to come back to you with the recommendation of who should be on that committee. I'm totally fine moving forward with that without coming back to you. I would like your feedback on those places and who you may want to see on that committee.
Okay.
You don't have to wait till December. You can tell me this week or next.
Well, I'm just trying to, give some perspective based on my experience.
Could you maybe set up a document that we can
Yeah,
all
add
add some
to,
things
yeah.
to?
Yeah, that'd be good.
And that way it can kind of happen on the side?
I can do
Be
that?
ready, yeah.
Good idea.
I found, when I contacted the people at Bend, that, once I got the name, the communication was, they were happy to share the information that they had and talk about what they did. They were actually a little bit excited about it. And I found the same thing in Grand Rapids. They were, people that are doing it are really interested in sharing the information that they have.
Anything else on that? Or before we move on to prioritization of the state of the parks? So, last month, we had our presentations on the state of the parks, and I wanted to make sure that stayed as part of our conversation, especially for the next budget cycle and planning for that, as far as what items need to be followed up on, how much they're going to cost, what needs to be in our capital improvement plan, that kind of thing. So I took what you gave me and I put it in a spreadsheet. So what you're going to see is what you identified as issues with maintenance of the existing parks. And then I have the spreadsheet laid out for prioritization purposes. So I just kind of wanted to show you what I had come up with and go over that. And then there were 3 specific issues I wanted to address related to the parks, but I'll just dive into it and then we can talk about it. So this is kind of what the spreadsheet looks like, and it's broken down by park. So this is Geneva Maney, and it's categories of landscaping and drainage, fencing and perimeter, and playground equipment and structures. Those seem to be the most common at the bigger parks. And then I have a column for prioritization of high, medium, low. Do we need to do it yesterday? Can we wait a year? And then a cost range for that item, the responsibility for the item, and a date completed. And so that's Geneva Maney. Then we have Roy Pope. So again, the items that were identified in that presentation from last month. The community center. And then I also included recommendations that were on from 2021 that hadn't been addressed. So that was doggy bag stations, multilingual signs at the parks, and then the drainage at Maney Park and the basketball court. They may be also included in those parks, but those were identified separately from last year, so I wanted to make sure they were pointed out. So another homework assignment is for you, that spreadsheet's on the Teams folder. I'd like for you to look over that between now and December and prioritize where you see what we need to focus on. And it can be even like the bigger picture for what should happen with things at Geneva Maney, or if we need to repurpose that area, or, it can be big picture, but for now, we can just look at that spreadsheet, prioritize, and we can come back and look at it together and discuss if that works for you. But the three things I wanted to focus on today, the little free libraries, I don't know if we're ready to address this. We talked about it last month about volunteer groups or Boy Scouts or high school students or different entity taking over that program project. So I just kind of wanted to open the floor for discussion on that to see if there was any updates there, or if anybody had any additional thoughts on what should happen with the little free libraries.
Okay, well, Ann made opened the thought about an Eagle project, and that's something that I think would be a great idea. However, the way Eagle projects work are they put together something and it's done.
Yeah.
It's not ongoing maintenance. And I believe that a number of them that I've paid close attention to of the little free libraries need maintenance. They need, sometimes it's minor stuff, sometimes it's a little bit more than that, but they all need some attention. And I think it'd be probably easy. Eagles frequently don't have, it's not easy to identify a good project that somebody wants done. And so they come up with stuff that gets approved and gets done. But I think this would be a potentially good candidate. But I've received very mixed messages from town staff about what to do about it. And some of the points that are raised are that some of them are in the parks and some of them are on private property, that they appear to have been, sort of scattered around willy-nilly without necessarily a great deal of thought about, how concentrated the traffic is by them. I know there's one at the foot of my road, and I stop and look at it from time to time. I've checked some books out, if check's the right word, but I've taken some books out and put more back in than I've taken out. But I can't imagine, nobody walks there. Nobody, you've got to stop and block traffic and get out. So I think that we need to hear back first, what do you all want to do?
I guess, the question is, should this remain a town program or should it not, I think? And so that's kind of the question I'm putting to you, just for some feedback.
Well, I initially put this on the list of parks in compiling the list of parks for the park review. And I did that because they were on the website, even the old website, and it was called the Little Free Library Trail. And, it's not really a trail, it doesn't lead anyplace. But conceptually, I'm very much in favor of the idea. I had gone to Jason to talk about it, and he had already initiated it. So Jason's the one that, bought them, decided on the placement, and got it running. And the times that I've stopped in, that I've checked on them, there is a, changeover, but some of them.
The maintenance hadn't been there, so
No,
that
it
needs to
hadn't
be
been any maintenance.
incorporated into it if we're going to keep it as a program. And I don't know if there is an Eagle Scout project or, I think, Coral, you mentioned a high school program.
Oh, we talked, I think.
Yeah, Inca High School did those
Yeah.
for Buncombe County as there's a wood shop class.
Yeah,
That was
wood
like one
shop.
of their projects they did during COVID, so I don't know if that's.
They
something-
built a box.
They built them,
Okay.
and then we had Buncombe County maintenance folks install them.
Okay.
So, and I know that on the website it's got ones listed that aren't I think there's ones that are that are town owned, And then there are ones that are, like, I mean, there's people on my street who
Right,
have them
private
and stuff that are on, like, they registered themselves on like the little library one, so I don't know if that's something that maybe, if there's some other nonprofit entity that wants to sort of take on the maintenance of them.
I almost think, like, Eagle Scouts great, but like you said, they do it and then they're done. Several of my friends in other towns that are like Girl Scout leaders, their troop adopts one. So it's an ongoing, like, there's always a troop in that area that's continues.
Yeah, there's one like
And so it's
that
like they
on there,
own
but-
that and they fill it and they maintain it and they paint it if they want to. So there's someone always taking care of it. It's more than like a one and done project.
Okay.
Yeah, there's one across from My Pizza on Merriman that's like that. I know it
That's the
says it's
Girl
troop.
Scout.
Yeah, it's a Girl Scout troop one. They put like food in it and books and stuff.
Yeah. So I don't know what the troops are like around here, but if there's someone we could find to connect with that is like the leader for this area.
Like an adopt. little
Yeah,
library,
like adopt
a
little
Girl
library,
Scout
yeah.
Or a neighborhood group. Or-
Yeah.
So I mean, from my perspective, I'm not sure if that's a decision that we need to make or if that's one that needs to be rendered to us. That, yes, the town, the staff or the board or whoever wants to keep them and we figure out, how to go about that. Like I say, they got on the list because they were on the list before.
Yeah, I think they were trying to pad out the recreation features because there weren't as many things, and now that there's like another park and there's a double park and all this stuff, maybe that is time to
Yeah.
pass it on. I don't know. Do you know the history by chance?
Of the libraries? Yeah. I think it would have been 2017, if I'm remembering correctly. My dad wanted to kind of like put these in neighborhoods, encourage, kids reading. And from what I understand is the stuff out right now was like a trial project. It was to see like actually how many of them would get used, because I think there were only 10 like made and bought and put in neighborhoods. So the idea of the trail concept was more the fact that over time, you would add them like more places. And they were kind of just randomly put just to see like citizen engagement. But I don't think they've been updated or maintained since being in place. And I know some of them have disappeared. So I think there's only 8 when I did that project last year.
I spoke to the people at Little Free Libraries. I think there's something in the team's folders about it, a report based on what I learned. They cost $250 or $280 a piece. And with that, you get a plaque and they get recorded on a national database.
Well, it sounds like for now, we'll keep the Little Free Libraries and then we can just prioritize the maintenance of those and think about involving civic groups in some way, if that's the route we want to take. But we don't have to make that decision today about whether or not, anyway, we'll move on. Riverside Park, I did remove the signs that were,
I noticed, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
I need to talk to Johnny about removing that sediment. I haven't done that, but I think we could probably just take care of that for now, until that construction starts, so. I'll move on from Riverside Park. I don't think I have anything else on that.
The flashing light at the intersection ties directly in with our conversation of, connectivity, and trying to figure out how to make it safe to get to the parks. And, I mean, that whole, getting around, the 10-minute walk thing, so.
When you say flashing light, is that one of those pedestrian signs that you hit and it starts flashing and then you can go, or is it more of like a street
I believe it's more of a street.
sign type signal?
Well, I know that there have been conversations around talking to DOT about adding crosswalks to Riverside Drive at the parks, and maybe that is what that's referring to. It was from the presentations from the state of the park, so I'm guessing it's probably the crosswalks that's referring to.
Yeah, so I live off from Riverside Drive. I'm in Mountain Living subdivision. And when you travel south on Riverside Drive, I think it's a Department of Transportation building. There's a parking lot on the west side, and there's a crosswalk, and then they go
Yeah.
into the office. And I'll tell you, sometimes, like, when I'm driving at 6 AM and it's foggy and I'm trying to get to the Y or something, I have to really concentrate. Like, there's been a time where I look up and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a person there, really, like, a light there, a flashing light. And so that's what came into my mind, and I'm like, okay, maybe we could put that in also at the bottom of West City View crossing over, because we're gonna have this new subdivision that's gonna, someday, it's gonna get built on West City View, and there's just gonna be a lot of people trying to get to Riverside Park. And, it gets really foggy on the river in the early morning, so I'm always like, why don't they put a light there over at Department of Transportation? I think because people do use that parking lot to cross back and forth, and people don't pay attention on Riverside Drive. It's really scary.
So yeah, crosswalks, what that's referring to.
Crosswalks, yeah. Crosswalks with a light preferably.
So Silverline Park, I'm looking for a recommendation on the area between the pavilion and the pirate ship. It's kind of a mud pit when it rains right now. There's no grass, it won't grow, it's in the shade.
Is it blocked off with the construction fencing
Part of
now?
it
So is
is.
it been seeded?
They seeded it, but I don't think it's gonna, I didn't realize they were gonna seed that area. I thought they were seeding more towards the river, so I'm not sure that was necessary, but it was done, so we blocked it off.
Okay, I was down there the other day and took a bunch of pictures, but I just have been so busy that I couldn't, I intended to have them ready for this meeting and didn't. But it is sort of how we talked the other day, there's a purpose-built wetland at one side. To the, standing on the pirate ship side and looking towards it, there's a purpose-built wetland on one side.
Yeah.
And then that flows around the pavilion, and the intention, as it was explained to me, is that the water would then go on down to the rest of the catchment area that is effectively downstream, upstream, that's effectively upstream. And what I didn't recall was, because I had a conversation with Luke before the park was open. I said, this is going to be a mud pit. It's wider than I remembered. And also the way the pavilion is built, they put a rock right in the logical place that you would have the walk. So the area between the two pavilions, where people would logically walk over to the parking area, has got a rock that's got to be 3 feet wide that is intentionally designed to keep people from walking there. So,
I've heard-
I mean, it seems like that's, given the high level of Equinox's planning, that was a little bit of a blind spot.
Well, I've heard sod, I've heard concrete, I've heard gravel, I've heard mulch. I'm just looking for, PGAC says, this is what we need to do.
The easy thing to do would be to move the rock so that it, is not an impediment, and put gravel there. And if the gravel were put down and it was decided at some point that that is not adequate, then the gravel forms the base for putting concrete in. But at this point, now that the park is done, getting a little patch of concrete like that poured is just going to be a lot more expensive than it would have been while they were still pouring concrete for, the other stuff. But the, gravel could be done, and then, something else could be done later. That would be something that Johnny and company could do. Pickup truckload of gravel, make it not too wide, 3 feet, certainly no wider than 3 feet. No boundaries, no borders, no wood or anything like that. Let it get walked down into the ground, add some more, and, it'll form its own base. And I don't think that will interfere with the grade of the water, but the water could pass through that. But that's something that, somebody ought to shoot a grade in there and, make sure that that's not causing a problem.
Isn't there more decorative type gravel in that? area? Could it be
Yeah.
the same type of
It could be
prettier stuff?
at the, what's it called, that's up at, that's this side of Reeves Creek Nursery. There's a gravel yard up there, and they have river rock up there, rounded river pebbles of all different grades. So you can get them, down to little, pea size to marble size to larger, and that would be brown and, not just gray granite.
But isn't at the park their gravel? It's
Existing
like
gravel.
existing gravel that is that, like, nicer, prettier brown? I feel
That
like
I'm
there
not-
is, but I
that I'm
can't
not
remember.
sure.
But if there is like more of a decorative gravel somewhere, it would be nice to mimic it right there.
That would be
Yeah.
that would be a more attractive,
Yeah.
solution.
Where's it?
Some more photos. And then do, this. Not there. I'm sorry. I was just going to do the images. To the bottom, I think. This.
You're getting close.
I'm trying to figure out what I'm zooming into.
Yeah. So, yeah, then pan a little bit to the side.
Is
Yeah,
this
just
area
above where
right
that
here?
sign. Well, it's actually between the two
Right
pavilions
here.
would be the
This-
logical, and that's why I said, when I visited there, it was both, it was wider than I thought. It was further from the walk over to the pavilion, and the area between the two pavilions that is, where the concrete is recessed is 6 feet or so.
So the suggestion is in that sort of trapezoid area between the between the shelters and the sidewalk on the playground side, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, so you can see the purpose-built wetland to the right.
mhm.
It's filled out more. And to the left, where you see the 3 people walking, that is also designed to drain. You can see the drain underneath
Right. Yeah.
that goes on down that way. So I think that's graded as a natural,
Right.
watershed.
Right.
So this is gravel.
Yeah,
here.
that's my memory.
Yeah, so the same,
That's gravel?
Yeah.
that same surface,
Yeah,
sure.
match it up.
And that's what it is. It's that brown.
Yeah,
and
I think
it's-
that would look nice,
Yeah.
matching it up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be low cost and attractive and would partly address the problem, except people, as there, are going to continue to walk wherever they're going to walk. But at least it would show you're supposed to walk.
Right.
All right, that was helpful, thank you. So that's what I had for prioritization. Does anybody have any questions or comments, or want to talk about that?
Yeah, I do. As far as Geneva Maney Park is concerned, well, first, I'll make the observation that came out in the review is that even Roy Pope Park, but particularly Geneva Maney Park, is that the equipment there is not particularly high-quality equipment, and it's all old. I mean, it's all dated. And so, here we're talking about, how to spend money, to fix and repair. And in terms of priority, I would say, anything that's a safety issue is obviously a high priority, but I think a lot of it is just kind of wearing out. As far as Geneva Maney in particular is concerned, I called Jerry the other day and asked him, how did it get to be there? What was the rationale? How was the land acquired or anything like that? And he didn't remember. He said it's been there for probably 20 years or maybe more, that the town, as he recalled, did put in the parking lot. But I think that we should, as a committee, consider completely repurposing that park. I think we should just imagine it completely gone and come up with, some sort of recommendation, because now it doesn't work as a pickleball court, and probably should not work for pickleball courts in the future after we get these others built, just because of the proximity of homes and that sort of thing. It's virtually never visited that I can tell. You would have a better sense of that, but.
I see people there maybe once a week.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm not there all the time, I just drive by.
So it just seems to me like it's, we're wasting, we talked about trying to fix the drainage in the parking lot, or repaving the parking lot. The cost on repaving the parking area out here was $30,000?
It was 16.
16? So
At the bottom of the well.
yeah, and that's half the size of, I just can't see that it warrants that sort of expenditure. And it seems like it's a good project for the committee to say, well, what can be done? What else could be done that would be, would be better? So that's my observation.
I tend to agree with that, and that's kind of why I just wanted to say, here's the spreadsheet, give it some thought, we'll revisit it. I think Geneva Maney is going to be a agenda item in and of itself with those recommendations. So I'd like to get, if you have thoughts on that between now and then, we can talk about it, but I think it could be an ongoing conversation about Geneva Maney.
Should we ask the neighbors their opinions about, I would like to ask the neighbors there how.
Why don't you?
Why not?
How about a little poll?
What they think about the pickleball situation. Do they mind the pickleball happening in their backyard? And do they have any preferences about what may happen?
I think that's a great
There.
idea.
I know there are, at least judging by what's in the yard, two of those, I don't know, maybe 10 houses, I don't know how many, 8 to 10 houses have children on that street. So they might appreciate the park being some version of what it is, but there's not a lot of room for something that attracts a lot of cars.
Right.
But there would be room for 4 more pickleball courts.
Well, and I definitely think, shade,
Right, it's
is,
big
like, it's
consideration
a direct
for
sunlight all day long. Yeah, it's an interesting little area.
We'll do that.
Okay. The next item was the pump track discussion. Walt, did you?
No, wait a minute. For the community center, I asked Miranda to just inform us about what how much the Y is using that field, and I'm not clear. I understand that as far as the Y in the town using that area, that while they're studying, what's going to happen with the administration of the town, that whole area is one of those sites, so that's a little bit up in the air. But
Yes.
I was at the field last year, about the same time, and, you know, I mean, just looked really run down and unutilized, and so I wasn't sure if I was there at the wrong season,
Yeah.
or what.
So we use it in the spring and the fall for flag football, soccer, field hockey. I think that's all of them. And just this past year, that was close to 500 kids that use it. So we're using it multiple times a week for practices and games in those seasons. Outside of that, we don't use it. And that's last year. Now, pre-COVID, I mean, it was hundreds more kids than that were using it. So it is a great resource because we don't have fields at our Ys that are close to here. So it is something that I think is super beneficial for the community. The actual community center we don't use. It's on our like backup, and part of our MRU is like, in the event of a weather emergency, we can take the kids in there, but we don't use it for programming, we only use the field. And as far as upkeep of the field, we line it, we make sure that the bathrooms are clean, because we're the only ones that use it, there's a key to those bathrooms. But the upkeep of like grass and the way down to it, that's still the town. And we just communicate with Johnny, like, hey, we need gravel. And sometimes we'll work, like we bring in volunteers to help spread the gravel if it's something that can't get done as quickly as needs to get done. So it's just a partnership in that way, but it is utilized by hundreds of kids. So.
Similar topic, and this, Eric and Adrian, this probably predates, I know it predates both of you, but you might have some understanding about it. For a number of years, the town operated a golf course on the landfill. And so I wasn't sure of the ability to, I mean, do we have access to that property?
It's
Is it
privately owned now.
owned, privately owned? Okay. Because I know that there is a need for, you know, sports fields. I went to my grandson's and we had to drive. We drove forever to get there. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think the town's owned that in at least a decade.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was sold off pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you.
But I think it's still a brownfield, so whenever it is developed, there's parts of it that can only really be used for stuff like recreation. Like there's only parts of it that you could really support an apartment building or something on. So that would be a conversation when they start to develop it.
That's why I was hoping that there was some access to utilize it as fields. You know, I mean, I played the course once or twice. It's pretty rolling, but you can find a sort of level spot.
Yeah, there's definitely spots to do even things, something as big as like not a stadium, but something like a memorial in Asheville. You could do something somewhere there. I know that they've looked at that, or at least there was discussions about a long time ago.
It was a private firm out of Raleigh that owns it now that was talking about housing development, but that was a while back, and we haven't heard from them in a long time, so I don't know what their plans are now. But a large portion of it is brownfield, so.
Yeah, I knew that. Okay, well, as far as the pump track, it's not really so much a discussion, but I guess it's several months ago now, that it perked up in my consciousness again, because prior to seeing it in the master plan, I'd never heard of one. I had no idea what it was. And then I learned that pump tracks could be utilized for handicapped people in wheelchairs. And I thought that was wonderful because there's nothing like that around anywhere. And that little kids, and this sort of followed on the chance meeting with the officer that said, well, there's nothing for the 12 to 16 or 17 age groups. And it seemed to me like a pump track, would sort of do all of that. And it was taken out of the plan for budgetary reasons, as I understand it. Is that correct? Do you remember?
There's a thought about phasing the park.
Pardon?
And we talked about phasing Riverside Park, is what you're talking about, the master plan, add some additional amenities, and so then that would be a consideration for the second phase, I think, was just for constraints on cost, to the scope of the project.
Okay, so that was my understanding, that, and so and then I attended that Riverside, river meeting, and ran into Jason Sequel there, and there were two of the board members there, and so that sort of spurred my curiosity. And at that point, I learned I learned after that pump track would delay not only the construction of the park, but potentially the funding for some aspect of it by up to 3 months, according to David Tuck, and that 3-month delay could impact funding, and so, the issue was sort of a dead issue at that point. But by then, I'd already reached out to some pump track people, and I just wanted you all to understand what I'd learned. From Jason, anything like that's done after the fact is going to involve heavy equipment that will undoubtedly tear up some aspect of what has just been built to get the equipment in there. The only way to get it in is through the parking lot, and because that's where it's the downstream portion of Riverside Park, down towards the school is where something like that would go, and so it would tear that up, which would then have to be rebuilt, adding to costs. If it would have to be run through a permitting process, and if the permitting process was done after the permitting process that we're going through now, it would cost maybe tens of thousands of dollars more, because it would be doing, redoing work or doing additional work on top of, in any event, more expense there. Both companies, one of them is local with the owner of the business is out of close to here. I mean, it's within an hour here. I forget, it's in the notes. Both of them told me the same thing, that a design would cost either $9,000 or $10,000. And that would be the total design, that normally they would then supervise, their people would supervise construction or maybe participate in the construction. That you could build a pump track for, $100,000. Now here we're talking about a paved pump track, with, a real nice one. But that in order to get a really top drawer one, you're probably talking about $250,000. So, I wanted you all to have that piece of information that I had acquired. And like I said, because of potential delays and impact on funding, it seems like it's a dead issue. But when I saw, I included links to a group out of Washington or Oregon. I mean, the group's in Colorado, I think, but this track they did, and it is out west. And a big part of the video was handicapped people that were using it, and what it meant to them to be able to participate in something like that. So that was it.
But it's taken out, is that?
It is not in the plan now.
Okay.
Because of, and Eric or Adrian can address this, but because we have reached our funding goals, then my guess is that the likelihood that we would go into a phase 2 is probably less, particularly if it would mean.
I don't know if that's necessarily the case, more than they were at 90% design when the idea was
Right.
brought up, and they didn't want to halt design at that point for 3 more months to add the pump track. Plus, the funding had been approved for what had already been presented. So phase one was definitely not the time for the pump track. Phase two, maybe, we don't know when that would happen and what that entails.
Well, I'm completely speculating that phase two might not happen. That I think that if we were to seriously turn our attention to Geneva Maney Park, Roy Pope Park, and given the condition it's in, the whole connectivity of, whatever that means and however much money is involved, and on top of the ongoing paving, stormwater, and the prospect of building a new town hall or new administrative center or whatever, that's going to suck up any money that might, any $250,000 that might be spent on a pump track. So I think it's probably, my guess is, purely a guess, is that it's completely off the table now. But I had gotten the information together. This is the group that needed to have that information, and now you got it.
Gotcha. The next item was this was on the agenda last month, and I'm following Walt's philosophy that if nothing would happen last month, it needs to stay on the agenda until something's done about it. So that's why it's on the agenda. It's in reference to walking access for Woodfin residents. We all know this is an issue for our community. There is funding opportunities out there. I have talked to Shannon about which direction she wants to go, especially with the connectivity with the parks and the interior of the town, if you will. And she's really interested in looking for a planning grant for that. So that's kind of where the direction we're heading with that now. So that's the update I have. Have anything to add, Walt?
No, I really don't, other than that I had heard that, and I had heard that money could be found for planning, that more so that perhaps than for, for actual construction. However, once again, this is a, sort of a time thing. As Lucy pointed out, we just went through the awards or the granting of the, that's the, what's it called, Reconnecting Communities
Right,
grant. And that, we've only got a certain amount of time before we could apply for it for next year. And as you pointed out to me, and which I agree with, that what we might need is a look by someone at the whole, connectivity issue for the town before deciding exactly, what needs to be connected and how. And I know how these things kind of drag out. And so, once again, it seemed to me that it was, urgent to work on that first part of the plan so that there was time to hopefully to do the reconnecting communities by next year, with the idea that construction like that would coincide with, the build out of Riverside Park, and, so that all of our stuff is coming together, say 2 years from now. So.
Anything else on that? All right, so that was all the old business. The only new business item I have is an amendment to the bylaws, and it was brought to our attention after one of our two alternates resigned. The original composition of this committee was 7 members with 2 alternates. But the alternates for this committee aren't really necessary, because if you have a majority of the board here, you can vote. You don't have to have every seat filled. And then we had an opening on the committee, and it was filled with an outside person. And so the staff's recommendation is to change the composition of the committee to just having seven regular members, which would require a amendment to the bylaws and would eliminate the alternate positions. So this is the amendment that is just scratching out the alternates reference. if you're okay with that, I'd like a vote on it. If you want to discuss it, that's fine too.
Didn't we already vote on it?
That was for adding the conflict of interest.
Okay. So, do I have a motion? Has everybody read this? You were notified by email, as I understand. Do you have anything to say? No. Anybody else have anything to say? Do I have a motion
Motion to approve this amendment to bylaws.
and a second?
I'll second it.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay.
So what does that mean moving forward for Kennedy?
So that position's been eliminated, and if there's an opening, he would go back through the application process, just as we did for Brian's seat.
Right. Okay, so
I
then.
mean, we've got vacancies every year, potentially
Right.
vacancies every year.
Right. Okay,
And we'll open up that application process every year for the incumbent and whoever else might be interested.
And does everyone know that Uta resigned?
But who?
Uta?
the alternate, the other.
Oh,
alternate.
Resigned.
Yeah, I didn't
yeah,
know that.
I think-
I mean, I caught that in what you
Yes,
just.
That's what I was
said.
referencing.
Yeah.
Uta resigned, so that's what sparked this conversation.
Project updates?
So I'll be pretty quick with this. Riverside and the Wave, the 100% design is complete. We are waiting on revised cost estimates for that. They have applied for permits for pre-construction and the 404 permits for the park side. As to,
404?
it's.
I mean, it's an error message when it shows up on your computer.
It's a federal permit. It kickstarts the permitting process as a
Yeah, I
federal
was just
permit
being
too.
facetious.
S2O is about to submit the certified letter of map revision for the wave. They met with Department of Public Safety, who handles that, a couple weeks ago. Part of that was to kickstart the permitting process, to maybe move it along a little faster, because once they submit, it's a 6 to 9 month process, so they're hopeful that might amend the timeline a little bit, but we don't know till Q1 whether that's true or not, so we're waiting to hear about that. The Greenway, most of you know, there was an open house for a public meeting for the Greenway. I think several of you attended. According to Allison with Buncombe County, it went really well. There were 63 attendees that signed in, and there was a lot of positive feedback. They opened up a survey after the meeting, and we're still waiting on them to collate the results from that, so I don't have any update on what those results are. And then funding, as was alluded to earlier, we are fully funded as of today. Feeling pretty positive about that. Nothing's really changed. And we are still awaiting a couple of grants that are out there. We should hear about one by the end of this month and then the other one by spring.
With the permitting, are we generally on track? For I mean, there was a delay.
About a month, I think, for S2O to finish up their design.
Exactly, that's what I was concerned about.
Which was helped, improved or aided by that meeting that they scheduled with the state.
But they were able to get Equinox what they needed to submit for the main part of the permitting, so
Yes.
it didn't hold it up too much.
So Q3 of 2023, we may be starting to see some activity.
Maybe end of Q2, probably Q3.
Q3, yeah, okay.
It's got to coincide with low water.
Which would be
For the
fall, I
construction.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, which might be fall, I mean, it just depends on rain.
Yeah, summer, late summer.
Great.
I think, I'd like to reiterate the concern by apparently more people about water quality now. And we started talking a year ago. That's how the whole water quality got on our future discussion items. And at that time, it was, the way we talked about it, there was not seen as a direct role for the town to play, that it was, hopefully, the town could support the, the people that had a commercial interest in it, or, but there was nothing the town could lead on. And I got a report back from the people that put on that symposium, or whatever you want to call it. And that was a collection of commercial operators and private individuals and agencies and towns. And it seems to me that it would be appropriate in the near term for the town to at least pass a resolution or do one of those things where they say, we support, we think it's a good thing, that we do whatever we can to clean up the water. I mean, here we're spending millions of dollars down there for the water, and I frankly wouldn't stick my foot in it based on the, reports that I hear on the radio. It's on the radio weekly, the E. coli numbers are, hazardous or, unsatisfactory. And so there were suggestions that came out of that meeting about what to do. There seems to be, and I don't know anybody, so I couldn't tell you what any of their names were, but there seems to be more of a groundswell, broad-based, of support for doing, figuring it out and doing something. And the town passing a resolution in favor, how nebulously they do those things, would still be a good thing to do.
I'll pass that along.
Okay.
That's all I had.
All I got too. This meeting's adjourned.
Figure out how to get on Teams.
Your husband wanted us to-
Well, that's what I like, because Brian,
Yeah,
it might be really interesting to set it up, like on the for your name.